So I'll hand over to Liz to get us underway.
Lovely. Well, welcome everybody. It's very weird just looking at the screen and seeing me talking back to me and not seeing everybody, but welcome everyone. I hope you're having a good day so far. So this session is on the school run, how we keep pupils and parents safe while we're still encouraging them to walk and cycle more and be more active in their journey to and from school. So first of all, I'd like to welcome our panellists. We've got Dr. Adrian Davis, Professor of Transport and Health at Edinburgh Napier University. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you.
We also have Carla Leo, Road Safety Officer from the London Borough of Westminster. Hello, Carla.
Hello.
We also have Jenny Wiles, Wiles, who Regional Director for the North from Living Streets.
Hiya.
So as you've already been told, this is interactive. It's not just about us talking amongst ourselves, it's about you asking questions, getting involved. Please do raise your hands up so you don't just have to listen to me for the whole hour with a little, I might give them a chance to speak as well, you never know. But let's start off with the first question then. So Carla, can I start with you? School streets, what are they? And how are they being introduced in your borough, and basically what's happening in London? Could you just give a brief overview?
Well, afternoon to everybody. My interpretation of school streets is it's a timed closure outside the immediate vicinity of a school or around the entire block or even multiple streets of a school, where it restricts or limits vehicular through traffic and essentially creates a pedestrian and cycle zone in the mornings and afternoons of the opening times of an education establishment.
And in Westminster, how are you doing that? What are you doing?
I'm doing a lot, but essentially in Westminster we have an active streets programme, so we're looking at creating more physically active and healthier streets in 3 different types of ways. So the first one is obviously with school streets, where we're closing approximately, well, hopefully up to 22 schools throughout Westminster, so essentially 1 per ward, and this can be done with either camera enforcement, so automatic number plate readings, or it can be done with bollards, or essentially it could be planters or planter sort of like barriers, but it isn't specific, it's specific to each of the locations, so one model does not fit all. Hello to your daughter in the background.
Yeah, sorry.
It's kind of like one of those Morecambe and Wise moments.
Get the numbers up.
Absolutely. So that's what's happening in Westminster. So there's 1 school street that we've installed that's permanent, and I've installed up to 14 as part of our COVID-19 response. So that's from April 2020 up until date till now, and they're enforced with turtle gate barriers. So they're literally the concertina barriers that you see around, road closure signs, and the DFT's regulated sign that says new road layout for social distancing. Certain locations have worked better than others, but that can be looked at further on in the discussion.
Yeah, should we come back to that one? I certainly have that experience as well. Adrian, if I can bring you into the discussion, you've recently authored a report which you found about road closures. That it can increase the number of pupils, number of children that are walking and cycling, but without creating road safety problems. There's often a little bit of worry that the more we get people to do sustainable active modes, are we actually making them more vulnerable? I wonder whether you could speak a little bit about your report.
Well, yes, I can, Liz. I mean, it's the report was funded by the Road Safety Trust, so they actually had the question they wanted answered, which was, does it just migrate or displace traffic to neighbouring streets, which then causes a road safety problem on those streets? So it's a fairly straightforward question, and we can kind of hypothesize and guess that that's a possibility. So what my task was to look at the international literature, which I can tell you now is very, very small. If you can speak Flemish, it would help, because there's more work going on in places in Belgium and in lowlands where they actually wheel out big metal barriers and then they wheel them back into the schoolyard at the end of the closure time. But the UK we are accelerating in terms of the number of schemes. So you've just heard Westminster up to 22 schemes. From Scotland, we've just had an announcement of a further 21 schemes in Glasgow. There are more in Edinburgh, in Perth and Kinross and other boroughs, East Lothian, and of course London's full of them, or got lots of them, and there are quite a lot around the rest of England. So the clear concern was one of road safety. What we found was something quite different, which was that when you actually asked local authorities, which is what we did as well, we interviewed local government officers working on school street closures. They said, actually, the reason why we implement these are to increase active travel. It's not really a road safety problem. It's about how you define road safety, of course, which is a long old challenge about what is road safety. But if you do it by Stats 19, there is really no Stats 19 problem in terms of reported casualties. In really all the places that we looked at. So the reason for implementing the schemes was different. It was actually done as a measure to improve health, the health of children, and improve the environment around. So it's quite interesting. And when we get into the detail, there are some more interesting findings, but I'll stop there for the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. I was just thinking we've also introduced them for social distancing. That's been how we got them in quicker within London. I'm going to ask Jennifer to talk, or Jenny to talk about Walk to School Week. But while I'm doing that, I wondered whether those that are sitting there at the other side of the screen, whether you could just put in whether you've introduced any school streets in the chat bar, how many you've introduced, or whether you're planning to, just so we've got a little bit of flavour and there's a little bit of chat going on there as well. While you're doing that, Jenny, Walk to School Week. God, I remember I've always enjoyed class within Lewisham. I imagine this year was a little bit challenging and maybe a little bit different to all the previous years. Can you say a few words how it went?
Was. Yeah, it was kind of different, but also kind of the same. So we did manage to recapture some of the magic of our regular Walk to School weeks, albeit with a bit of frantic replanning in the background. So normally Walk to School Week takes place in May, just before the school holidays and after SATs. So it's quite a nice kind of celebration of the end of SATs, as well as celebration of walking to school. Obviously this year we had a bit of a problem because none of the schools were really very open at that time. So we took a decision to actually postpone Walk to School Week to October this year. So that we could support schools on their return after the summer break, and actually, you know, we found some really positive benefits from holding the week. Then, you know, we could have just cancelled it and said let's leave it till next year, but it did kind of hit that time where schools are, you know, they'd kind of got into the swing of reopening and the immediate challenges that posed. And then they were starting to think more broadly about, well, you know, how are our children kind of getting to school? How was their health? How can we help support their kind of ongoing positive behaviours, and so we had a really good take up. We have Walk to School Week packs that we produce that schools can buy to support the week and give those out in classrooms, and we were really fortunate this year to have some additional support from Department for Transport so that we could give packs out to more and more schools free of charge as well. So we had over 500 schools taking part, an equivalent of around 240,000 children and their families, and yeah, it was, I think the focus of the week it is just a week-long thing, so it's really about that celebration, encouraging people to try out walking, you know, perhaps for the first time, and also with schools kind of as an initial starting point for engaging with perhaps more of a substantial walking promotion in the future. So yeah, we were really pleased. We also did some interesting surveys with YouGov, and found strong support for things like school streets. So it's really good to kind of hear the work that's going on nationally and internationally around school streets as well. It really complements a lot of what we're trying to do.
Brilliant, thank you. Just looking at the side, I don't know whether the rest of the panelists can see the chat at the side. Certainly a fair number that are coming in. One of the first points I saw was from Martin Andrews in Suffolk, where there's no political support. I wonder whether the panelists would like to speak a little bit, maybe about how you can try and bring the politicians with you, or is there a magic wand to how to get people that may be worried about it on board? Is there any suggestion maybe able to help Martin, assuming Martin you do want some school streets in your county? Carla?
Yeah, I'm happy to go and answer that. I've been quite lucky in Westminster. They are supported just because we have had the Active Street programme in place. There are some, I would say, schools potentially where we feel that a school street would be pertinent and it would really help their situation. They haven't quite understood what it is. They don't know what it looks like, how it works, and we've used literally one of our permanent school streets as a benchmark for other schools. So they potentially visited it, seen how it's worked as it currently is. They've asked questions from the head teachers and some of the parents that use the school street as well to gather or garner support in their location as well. And they've actually put it forward or pushed it forward with local ward councillors that were unsure about it as well. Like I say, I'm slightly different in my situation, but I would honestly say if you can, your local ward councillors to go on a walkabout, view a school street either in your location or a nearby county or local authority to show them actually how it works. It's always good seeing how it works on street, because I know you can get lots of sketch drawings and you've got lots of pictures, but that doesn't show what it might look like and how people are interacting with it on a day-to-day basis.
Brilliant. Sorry, I had to mute then. The dog barked, which you know this always happens. Adrian, have you got any suggestions about how you can get politicians and those maybe other senior managers that aren't on board to believe in them?
Well, I support Carla's view, taking people to see things in neighbouring authorities. Maybe it's a bit of a travel from Bury St Edmunds or wherever it is to an adjacent county that has got some school streets. But one of the points that came out of research review I did was that there was a win-win-win situation, and what I mean by that was the schools supported it, and of course the schools have to support it. You can't go ahead without the school support it. The parents and the children supported and liked it, but also the residents liked it. And I think one of the things here about political support is listening to the residents, because you will get residents that go, well, it's a death trap, there's bound to be a collision, rather an injury here sooner or later, which is a usual refrain on school streets. There's also, we have to recognise there is, human beings don't like behaviour change. They're not good at behaviour change. So there'll be reticence, there will be uncertainty by some, but there will be a lot of people that say something has to be done about this school street, because people are doing 3-point turns and there's little kids here they can't see and all the rest of it that we all know about, those sorts of things going on. And use that in a positive way to be able to argue the case that let's just pilot these things in the way that, of course, with the pandemic, we've been able to use funding to do exactly that, to actually put in things quickly in order to just test their effectiveness. Because I come back to my win-win-win situation, we had reticent residents particularly concerned about road safety aspects of and traffic migration and all the rest of it, which didn't happen. And what happens with school street closures, from the, albeit the limited number of studies we looked at, local authorities we looked at, was that support goes up significantly after it's been implemented, because people find actually it's a lot better. And would I want it to go back to what it was? No. So I think there's something to be done there about trying to talk to residents about the opportunities to improve things through these temporary measures, which are, well, temporary and short-term measures in terms of being time limited, because they are, as Carla started off in the definition, they are time limited. You know, it's just a couple of hours in the day, if that. It's a small thing, but it obviously is of great import for our children's short and longer term health.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just seen one of the other questions in here was from Rob Wiltshire. How well have local school streets been supported by local residents, and basically, I mean, we had one in our borough where it was on a cul-de-sac, and they were so worried. They now love it because they've seen the benefit to it, but until it went in, they didn't see the benefit. But I wonder, Jenny, do you have anything? Do you want to? Got anything you can answer on that one about how school treats?
I was actually just going to pick up from Lindsay, who's put in the comments about her experience in Leeds. And actually, I think what Leeds have done has been really great, because they started off actually just doing some school street events, so just one-day closures as a bit of a try before you buy, if you like, to see what it was like, but also it kind of shows what a school street could be like without that worry from residents or others that you know, about the side effects that there might be. So and then they've gone on to do a trial with more schools on a more long-term basis and pilot the approach, and I think what I've heard so far, she might be able to add and tell us a bit more later, is that it seems to have been going really well. She does flag up the challenge that boroughs outside of London have, in that they don't have the same powers to enforce, but we have had the commitment from government that they are going to look at the camera enforcement, moving traffic offences outside of London, and update the rules around that. So that should make it easier. I guess we just need to put pressure on them to do that sooner rather than later.
Brilliant, thank you. I've also a question here about, do the panel think that school streets are an option in non-city areas? Being from South East London, it's hard for me to comment on that, but do any of you, maybe sort of again, Jenny or Adrian, do you have any comments about how well they can work in more country, rural areas?
I'll just do a brief thing, which is picking up on really on school travel plans over the past 2 decades perhaps, that of course one of the things with them, even with villages, that you have park and stride type initiatives. So you might agree with a local pub to use the car park or village hall, that sort of thing, and then walk from there to reduce the congestion close to the school site, in the same way that, of course, school street closures try to do that as well. So one of the things we found from some of the more rural ones, Perthington, Ross comes to mind, but not alone, is the use of lots of park and stride places. So you might have, let's just say, let's sake of argument, you have a village where people do come from all points of the compass. So you'll have various entry points to the village, and to try to help there is exactly that idea of just using a park and stride location, or locations plural, to diminish that. And of course, if you can't park in the street, in the side street that maybe off the ribbon development, typical village situation, then those park and ride points are really helpful and will be seen as beneficial by many of the villagers as well, of course.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
again, I think.
So I was just going to add to what Adrian said, that yeah, I think park and stride alongside a school street, fantastic. And I think that's the thing with school streets, like they are kind of flavour of the moment, and they are fantastic, and you know, we see great outcomes from them, but they're not the only intervention that we've got in our arsenal in supporting school travels. So we can use them alongside other initiatives. They're not going to work everywhere, so those other initiatives you know, sometimes come into play, into the forefront. And certainly with our WOW schools that are involved in our longer term scheme, having the reward incentive again alongside other interventions can also be fantastically impactful. The helpful thing, we've got quite a lot of areas where we're running WOW alongside the local authority and putting in school streets, and that works quite nicely because WOW generates data, so we can also see the impact that the school street is having using the WOW data.
Yes,
I'm just going to add to that if I
Carla.
can as well. Just agreeing with Adrian and Jenny, school streets have to be mentioned within a school travel plan in Westminster in some way, or they had to have a road safety concern or issue that has been brought about, just so we've got a basis to where to begin from, so an evidence base. And I will say some of the school streets that have been looked at in Westminster, they've started off as a school street, but they've expanded out into wider programs. They're more like public realm schemes now, where we're looking at slowing down speeds of vehicles in certain areas, where we include green infrastructure, and where we also look at TfL's healthy street model as well. And we even rearrange parking, so it is creating more park and stride kind of like areas or zones, but it becomes a whole community and sort of like highway improvement project rather than just a school street.
Sorry. We'll keep barking. This is the joy of working from home. So do any of you, are watching, listening, do any of you have any questions? Do any of you want to come on screen and actually show your face and ask a question in person? So imagine now you're in the audience at Harrogate, you're at the conference, you put your hand up and ask a question. Please do so, because it would be good to hear from you. And I just wondered, we've spoken a little bit about displacement of parked vehicles and traffic. And I'm thinking that's one of the things that I had to have a report to go to my managers about displacement. And I wondered whether between the panelists you could come up with, if there was a top tip to implement a successful play street, what would your top tip be? And while you're doing that, I think I'll also ask the people watching to put their top tips in the chat as well, so that we can share this. And actually when we finish, you know, we've got another 40 minutes to chat, but when we finish this, there's some points that we can go back to and look at and hopefully use as reference in the chat. So we start with Adrian, with you.
Okay, so top tip, I think carefully about the road network around the school, because the characteristics will make closures options or not options. Of course, you've got to think about primary route networks and all those sorts of things and network capacity. But it's often the studies I looked at involved more than one street being closed. And in fact, some of the mitigation measures that happened in order to deal with initial problems were because local authorities had closed half the length of a street, which then led to some problems, typically people doing 3-point turns, etc. again, to go back the way they came. So I think be bold enough to think about closing full sections of roads. Be careful about making sure there's good distribution around the network, but it is important to get that right. And then, sorry, I'm going to give you another tip here. Start talking to the residents early.
Right, yeah, bring them with you.
Yep.
Yeah. Carla, any comments?
Yeah, it's following on from what Adrian said, really. Communication for me is the key. I can talk quite a lot, but it's getting the right messaging to the right audiences. So again, residents from the get-go, if you've got a resident association group or a key resident that you've been engaging with within that school street or within the actual street or location, to be your spokesperson as such, and to relay key messages from a particular resident group or the whole street is absolutely important. You have to have their buy-in, because I know we call it a school street and it's slightly biased. It's really actually to make the residents' life easier, in all honesty. But as soon as you say the word school street, they believe that they've been alienated in some way. So you really need their buy-in. Communicating as well with parents and carers, because they often feel that they've been got the short straw because they can't park where they need to park. It's showing them where they can park rather than where they can't park if they are coming by car, and encouraging sustainable travel. Having a package basically for the school, an education package of cycle training or pedestrian training if you have it, so tie in with whatever your local authority team can deliver. And I would say as well, communicate to, if you are within a local authority, communicate to teams outside your own team, they don't often know what a school street is. They have no idea, but you might have to tap into parking or to street works or to events. All of this has been a learning curve for me, because literally every department, even antisocial behaviour team, have to know about it because there might be issues there. They have to be involved in that consultation as well.
I think, Carla, you may have found yourself a job there, because there's a comment from Sarah saying a policy template from RSGB would be really appreciated. And I think I can see a few people on my screen here that might be useful to help writing that. So more work. Jenny, a top tip from you for making it a success? Anything you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think I maybe even go a step further and say kind of the ideal scenario is that we're not kind of coming to a school and saying we're going to put a school, we're maybe going to a school and going to the residents of a street and bringing them together if we can, and asking them, what do you want this street to be like? What are some of the challenges? What are the different tools that we could use to overcome those? And yes, the answer then might be a school street, but maybe we're jumping the gun a little bit sometimes. And I know it's tricky, especially at the moment, because we've had a lot of emergency active travel funding and swift responses needed to the current pandemic and the challenges that presents. But I think we maybe need to sort of backtrack a little bit and not forget that doing that engagement and asking people what they need first might actually lead us to a slightly different solution than the one we first think.
Brilliant, thank you. Just again, looking at the chat here, there's no such thing as a silly question, Holly. Every question is relevant. How do parents and students with disabilities access the school street if the street is closed? Adrian or Carla?
Carla.
Sorry, I just jumped in.
Really, Carla? It's not like you.
Always. Yeah, this has been a factor. So for me, and I've worked with special educational needs and disability children before, and I think there's sometimes concern, but there's also they're actually underrepresented in terms of what they can do. They could do a lot more than what you expect they can do. So I actually, for the school street that's on Enford Street in Marylebone in Westminster, provided a private travel plan for each of the individuals. So one came by wheelchair, so he actually could be wheeled in with his learning support assistant, so he still wasn't allowed through the school street, and he came in a taxi, so it's totally feasible. The other student had they had calipers, so literally they hold the legs in place, and a walking frame. As part of their physiotherapy and exercise, they still need to walk, so I included that as part of it, and looked at they've got a personal care plan as such with occupational therapy that was looked at, and I said, look, it's totally feasible that they can walk this distance. If it is an issue, then the school would allow them to go through the school street, just that vehicle, and then close it off with the barriers again. Again, if it's with automatic number plate reading, you can get the vehicle registration number or whatever vehicle is coming through exempt or on the exemption list with your parking team. So it's totally possible to accommodate SEND students, but I would always aim for them to either walk, wheel or cycle where they can. My option isn't to exempt them straight away.
Brilliant. So case by case basis, is it? You sort of a discussion with them.
Adrian,
did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think really Carla, and I'm glad she did it because she's at the front line dealing with it, but I'll just only add that normally all the local authorities had a policy that there were children with special educational needs and other related issues, then there would be exemptions, and it's not, there is flexibility in the system, that's the point.
Yeah, we had one issue in my borough where it was an SEN child was picked up by cab, but we had a physical closure, so we had to give them a sort of permit basically to come in and be able to pick up that child to then go to another school. So I think very much like Carla said, case by case is the way that we deal with it. We've gone back to display. Sorry, there's my son now walking past as well. See, all these people working from home. So we've got, sorry, displaced parking has been raised again. Has anyone had any real problems with this? Has anybody else, if anybody else within the chat would like to comment about that as well, it'd be really useful. And can I just add as well, if we don't get to answer all the questions within the chat, I'm sure Ed will be able to provide that for us, and we'll come back, we'll have a look at it as the panel and come up with any responses to you directly as well. Liz has said, does this also apply for the emergency services needing to gain access? So, oh, that's PC Liz Johnson. So how do the police and the emergency services gain access on a school street? Carla?
I was going to volunteer myself. For the, obviously the automatic number plate reading ones, emergency vehicles are exempt anyway, so they'll just go through, they don't get ticketed because they're part of the cancel list. So there's a push and a cancel list with the parking team. If it's with gates, obviously you'd have to have either somebody positioned there, or you'd have to, what I do is consult the emergency services contact lead within the local authorities. So it's providing them with the locations, the timings, if that is going to be an issue with literally on-call responses. So if there's an emergency route or preferred route that the emergency service, such as, you know, police, fire or ambulance need, we'd have to reconsider the timings for that school street or even the school street itself. It's not a case of saying we're going to do it regardless, because we know that there are certain, well, basically emergency services need to have access to roads at all times. So we would work quite closely with each of our emergency services contacts.
Thank you. Do either of you want to say anything on that, Adrian or Jenny? No. Okay, so what else? A top tip from Rob is about making the negatives positive and enhance the benefits. Have you got any other ways, Adrian, that we can enhance school streets? How can, it's going back to probably the first question about selling school streets to the dissenters, those that need to be dragged into enjoying it. And then perhaps we can move on to Jen with the same question. How do we really get those that are just really, they're not keen, we really want to drag them forward?
Well, one thing I'd say would be to show them the evidence, because I think that before I did the review, there really wasn't any evidence gathered. It was all disparate, gathered perhaps by Living Streets and others, but not collected in any organised way at a national level. So that's why I found there were no peer-reviewed, that's academic papers yet. There will be, and I will probably, if I get round to it, be one in the English language. So it just shows you how new it is, even if school street closures did allegedly start in Italy in 2009. So I think one, use this evidence, the review, and you can go to the Napier website and download the report, but look at that. Certainly when I was able to share the report with the convener, that's the councillor responsible for transport in Scottish local authorities, the convener for Edinburgh, Anna Richardson, Councillor Andrew Richard, was really grateful to receive it, because they were taking a report to council, to full council, to approve another 21. And evidence, of course, is important. The political decision may have been made, but it was pretty useful to them to be able to say, and look at the evidence we've got from Scotland and elsewhere across the UK. The other thing, which might be just pushing it wider than school streets itself, is that, first of all, to say that quite a few of the school streets that I looked at within local authorities had 20-mile-an-hour speed limits put in them. So that is obviously a positive in terms of trying to start to change the feel of the environment and get that downward migration in speeds. We know that speeds generally drop between 1 and 2 miles an hour on average when you implement a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. So every little helps. We know that the effect of speed reduction plays out in casualty numbers as well. So that's important. And then there's a wider point, which is about these school street closures are part of a wider traffic management toolkit, and therefore, like including 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. So it could be that you find that over time we have more low traffic neighbourhoods in which you have components which include school street closures. And my final point is from an evidence review I did last year for a sort of unlikely client, which was Sport England, who wanted to know what are the most effective measures to implement to increase active travel. And we found the most effective measures were town and city-wide interventions, by which I mean a whole set of interventions, different ones, including perhaps school street closures, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, segregated cycle facilities, better pedestrian crossings, etc., that together have a synergetic effect that start to change the environment positively for people travelling on foot and on bicycles without increasing risk per unit of exposure. So I think, so it's a long answer, but I think that it does spin into wider schemes that we probably will be looking at, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years.
Brilliant, thank you. Jenny, I've got, there's another question here about displaced parking again, and it's a concern with engineers. Have you had any dealings with the issues of displaced parking, whether there's any evidence? Does it happen, or do people tend not to travel to that one street, but just does it displace equally around an area?
Yeah, so I imagine Adrian and Carla might have a bit more to add in terms of any kind of research or direct experience of this. I guess it goes back to the question of is the school street, is that the right intervention for that place? You know, I'm thinking particularly of places like Leicester, where we've got schools in really close proximity to each other, and any intervention you do at one school might well have a knock-on effect on a neighbouring school or the community around it. So that is one thing to kind of keep in mind. But at the same time, I mean, I suppose ultimately what we're trying to do with these suites of interventions for schools is actually get behaviour change. So get people converting from using the car to get to school, to walking, to cycling, to scooting, and so therefore you will get this you know, mythical evaporation of traffic. It's not mythical, it is real, and you know, we've seen it in some of the research on low traffic neighbourhoods around London as well. So I think it's that there might be some, and it might be short term or it might be longer term, but by and large, if we're putting in the school street, but we're also incentivising walking, cycling, and providing wider support for people to be able to do that, providing park and stride sites, as Adrian mentioned before, in partnership with a supermarket or a church hall or whatever it might be, then you can kind of head up a lot of these problems before they appear. I suppose the other thing just to say, with regards to school streets, what was I going to say now? Oh, it's completely gone out of my head. I'll let the other two maybe pick up on that theme. Thanks.
I'll hop in there just after Jenny, just again supporting again what Jenny and Adrian have been saying. For me, it was a case of I had local residents believe that the traffic would go down there, literally the next street or adjacent or parallel to them, and it would affect them totally, and they were against it, or they literally objected to the scheme. So what I found quite useful in proving that it didn't, you know, displace traffic to other neighbouring roads was to have, for a whole year, 3 different intervals, I've literally commissioned traffic surveys just to show in literally about a block, I think 3 or 4 roads around the school street, what the traffic flow is. And I'd started that from before, so I'd done it before, during and after, so I could compare it to show that actually that traffic isn't moving onto those roads. And I also measure it by, it might be quite sad, but how many complaint emails I received from those residents, because they had my emails, they were in communications with me, and if it wasn't working, I would receive long emails in the middle of the night with videos, with pictures about what it looks like currently on street. That, I know it might seem tedious from a local authority perspective, but that's the best kind of information I could receive, because it's telling me what's really happening out there on the street. I haven't received any since I put my school street in. I received a few in April, so it got installed in April 2019. I received a few for another 2 months just after, up until May, and I've received none from May up until now about displaced parking. So again, it is a case of what Adrian said right at the beginning, putting it in, piloting it, and then reviewing it and monitoring it. Most of it is a case of people believe worst case scenario because that's what you've got in your head. But once you see it working, it actually just starts integrating into your everyday life, and there's minimal change to those residents or businesses. The most effective change, I would say, is perception and behaviour, which is what we want to get out of the scheme.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Carla.
Thank you.
That picked up on the point I forgot to make. In that, yeah, I think a lot of people they'll see evidence, even if it is from a neighbouring authority, and say, well, or even a next door school, and say, well, that's that school, that's that local authority. It won't work here, and this is why. So making sure that you've got that evidence and that data as you're piloting something, so then you can go back to those dissenters and say, well, this is what's happening here now. I mean, there might always be people who will stick to the guns and say, you know, I don't agree with this, I'm not happy about it. But if you've got 95% of people saying they support it and they want it, then you might just have to disappoint a small handful of people if it's for the greater good and the greater benefit.
There's I've just seen an in comment from Ian Watson, and we've had a low traffic neighbourhood where what he's written here is about anecdotal evidence from a friend in Hackney is that the nice areas have got the school street schemes and the traffic is now going through the poorer neighbourhoods, and there's a feeling there allegedly that the rich are winning and the poor are suffering. Are there any facts that will substantiate that, or is it just sort of hearsay? We've had something very similar where we've done a low traffic neighbourhood, and it was really well received in that the schools they didn't need school streets because there was no traffic going near there. Now we've had to change things because of, you know, basically because of the feedback, and they're really worried now. The schools are really worried about the volume of traffic that's going to be going through there. So is there any evidence that maybe school streets work better in the nicer areas where there's more support, or more affluent areas? And then after that, I'm just going to ask Max Moorcock to actually come up on screen and mention London Road Safety Council. And if he doesn't come up on screen, I'm not letting him say it. So Adrian, any...
So, so I'm a public health doctor by background, and so we talk about the inverse care law. So the inverse care law is that the worried will go to their GP and get someone to look at their little spot on the hand or whatever it is, and the people that really need to be screened for cancer don't go because they're firefighting, living, I'm being stereotypical here, but a single parent in a flat, and they just don't have the time, the resources, the education, all those skill sets necessary to help them be able to deal with some of these problems. So the same can apply. So where you've got schools that are well heeled and they've got the contacts and they know what they're doing, they can see that, and they're not firefighting other issues of, let's just say, truancy and other problems, they can be in a better position to go positively to their local authority and say, yeah, we'd like this. And they may be in a situation where they don't really need it so much. I mean, I don't want to take it away from them and not give it to them, but actually we know in terms of social class, there's a steep social class gradient for child road crashes and injuries. So it is in the poorer areas that we do need more measures to enable children to travel safely. So we do need to watch out for this because it is built in as a bias in the system.
Brilliant. Carla or Jenny, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll just add to that, just obviously because City of Westminster is classed as quite a privileged local authority, but we have the same pockets of disparity and depravity really throughout the borough. So hence why I made it at the very beginning. So if we were going to put in a school street, we'd have to take into consideration the socioeconomic background of a location, the actual public realm, what is physically there in terms of infrastructure, is it needed, the types of pupils travelling at the time. So the hands up survey that we collect, are there a lot of pupils that are actually coming by vehicles? Do we need it? Is it necessary? In some locations it's not, and it might be a poorer area because they're actually walking. About 80% of the pupils in a particular school I'm thinking about already walk, so it's not a case of providing a school street, it might be something else. But having said that, everything is taken into consideration and it is bespoke for each of the locations. I believe at the minute I've only got currently one school that is a independent school, a private school as known, that has a temporary school street in place. The rest are all local authority across the board. A few are a bit poorer than the others, but in all essence, it's not rich versus poor. For me, it's safety, air quality, and physical health that should take precedent when putting in any type of infrastructural scheme.
I think I can, from a Lewisham point of view, we've got them literally across the whole of the borough. We've got 9 in and another 22 coming in the next few weeks. And exactly the same thing. It's a real cross section. We have a few pockets where it's a little bit more affluent, but the majority are in roads that aren't that affluent. I've just seen a thing here as well from Holly, just asking. I'll do some quick fire questions actually now, because we've only 15 minutes left. Max, I'm still waiting for you to show yourself on the screen here. And brilliant. So bus routes, what do you do on a bus route if there's a school street?
Don't include it.
Don't include it. Yep.
I'm going to add to that. Hackney, I know, have got a school street that has got a bus route, or I think 2 running through it, and they've it's a bus gate essentially. So I believe they've exempted it. I'm not quite sure, but you can find out more information from the London Borough of Hackney. I think I visited it a while ago. This is pre-COVID, when people could meet on the street and talk. So it showed how it actually worked. But it'd be quite interesting if you did want to do that, just to have a quick view of how it works and answer more questions.
Yeah, we've done the same thing on the first ones we're introducing. We're not looking if it's on a bus route at the moment because of costs and everything else. Max, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on about the camera, so I apologise. It's not shyness. I think it's more to do with my technology. Yeah, no, sorry. Just to go back on that last quick point. Yeah, there are. I think I believe there's at least 2, if not 3, that have bus routes running through them, and obviously the buses are allowed to travel through, which is one of the things I sort of put in one of the comments earlier on, was about education of the children as well, which was one of my top tips prior to putting the installing the system, because obviously making sure that children are aware that there is going to be traffic on that road, as well as so you can't just wander down the middle of the street without a care in the world. So yes, so sorry, I mean I know we discussed looking at the work that the London Road Safety Council has done with the Trust for London on deprivation, and I'm not going to even pretend, with Adrian sitting there, I'm not even going to pretend to try and but like I know as much as he does, but I know it's obviously there was a lot work looking into the pedestrian casualties being in some places 3 times higher to other areas, and obviously one of the things we're looking at is with a time when certain ethnic minority groups are at a sort of more of a danger of COVID, as has been shown to be true, and then obviously be an area where we want to encourage more people to travel by actively. It will be one of the things we want to make sure that we're ensuring that we're taking that into account as well. I'm sorry, is that really?
Yeah. Is there anything, Matt, Adrian, that is there any information or support that you could offer for the say the London Road Safety Council, where we're looking at that whole issue of deprivation, road safety within the BAME community, and I think, as we've already said here, as well as within the less affluent areas? Thank you, Max.
Yeah, so I mean, there's research going back a long time. In fact, there's something called the Black Report, which was a very famous report in public health world, which was published in 1981, looking at inequalities across Great Britain, I think it was at the time. And one of the sub bits in there was that children from lower socioeconomic class households are at least 4 times. We've got evidence from places around the UK that it's much, much higher. The gradient is much higher. I remember from Glasgow in the 2000s, research looking at children there being at much, much greater risk than 1 in 4 of being injured on the road if they were from a poorer income group than the more affluent ones. So I think that's general across the population. There are lots of reasons which help to explain that, and they're complex and detailed. They include things like lack of gardens. They include single parenting and other issues where it's hard to keep an eye on children, and poorer communities often having busier roads close by them. But there are many, many other factors. So I think I'd probably want to take some of this offline if Max wanted to, and I'd try and have a look round in terms of recent evidence in the international literature, but that will be there.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think just to kind of pick up on that quickly as well, sometimes when we're engaging schools in WOW, we get the response, well, we don't really need to work with Living Streets and run a walking scheme because we've got 95% of our children already walking to school. But often these schools are in the more deprived areas, working with children from more deprived communities, and actually the schools that we do manage to get into and work with of that type, yes, we're not going to get a 25% increase in walking rates because it's not physically possible, but we might get a small boost, and at the same time we're also rewarding that walking behaviour, and we then have the opportunity to work with school and with the local authority as well to look at what some of those safety issues might be, and you know, often they're not caused by the school community because the majority of them are walking. It's through traffic, it's rat running, and there are solutions that maybe we can find to make it a safer journey for those that have to walk.
That segues perfectly into a comment from Shelley, well, Jenny, and it was anecdotally, we're seeing a similar thing in Ealing where the traffic pollution has been pushed to the lower socio-economic areas, including rat running past the less affluent schools. And I think that is something that's probably where possibly we need to look at the area and not just every individual school, and maybe it is more to do with low traffic neighbourhoods rather than just picking out those schools. Another question, I think it's gone further along now, but it was about resources, and implementing school streets can be quite resource intensive. Is there any tips? I think it was, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, but I know your location. It was just about 500 schools, Rebecca, sorry. So there's 4 full-time education officers, including road safety and active travel, and over 500 schools. Does else have that same resource problem? And if you have, how have you got over it? Maybe you could put that in the chat. And then if there's any tips from the panelists that could help, Rebecca.
I'm happy to go with that one. I don't have 500 schools, but I am the only road safety officer that deals with road safety, school travel, and air quality projects. So it's only me that's leading on school streets. And what I would say is you'd have to select. I would get your engineers, if you can, review every single location as possible, and then start filtering out the ones that potentially don't need a school street, or it's not a school street led project. Then you'll have a smaller list to deal with, to look at, and then separate them out as to, do you have the funding, can you get the funding, as well as do you have the support. And then potentially you had, I think, 5 team members. Which team members by area or by whoever they're working with school wise already lead on those school streets? So you're actually splitting it up and divvying up the work if you can. I know funding is quite a big issue, obviously, during COVID, what's been happening now. So funding and resourcing is limited. So it's whether you just want to pilot one, in all honesty, and then go from there. But I would definitely say assess all your schools, every single one, and then start drilling down the list.
Brilliant, thank you. Any other comments from the panelists? Ed, there's some questions, I think. I've seen one, sorry, from Mr. Ahmed, is it?
Yes, we have had some questions in the Q&A section as well. Yeah, a question. So, dear Sarah, you know Bangladesh is an overpopulated country. Most of the people live in villages. They're very much unaware or do not know about traffic rules and regulation. It's talking about how can we educate? How can we educate more?
I'm happy to throw my thoughts in there as well. In terms of education, it would be, I know again, it's talking with people. I've gone in many a times, spoken at parents' evening. I've gone to parent coffee mornings, minus the coffee, maybe a bit of cake, and spoken, and they've spoken to me. I know I talk a lot, but I've been listening and absorbing basically what their school run is like, what is requested of them, what their understanding is, and then formulating an education program about what their needs are. So it might be a case of I could go into school and I could read out the highway code, but that's not useful to them. It has to be bespoke to that set of parents and that school. So the education program could be educating the parents, as well as potentially providing pedestrian training for the parents and the children at the same time. It could be leaflet distributions, letter drops. It could be even follow-up sessions with the schools. It is totally bespoke to that school and that set of parents or that group of parents to improve their understanding. But it's just keeping the education and the messaging going. So even if it's related to a school street, it has to be before, during, after, and continual. So you just need to set that out with whomever is leading on school streets, whether it's your local authority, whether it's a school itself, deciding who does what and when. That is really useful to continue the message and the conversation going.
Brilliant, thank you. Adrian or Jenny?
Well, I just had a point about the health side. I suppose that what we have to do for the younger generation is to give them a better future than we've kind of given ourselves in a sense in the terms of the level of the disease burden we have in society. And you can guess what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about physical activity. So physical activity is the nearest thing we've got on the planet to a magic bullet. It's what we're designed to be, and yet it's what we try to design out of our lives in the often naive belief that being inside a motor vehicle is somehow better for us, even when distances are short. Now, I know that's layered with lots of cultural interpretations about the value of the car over and above and its functional use. But for our children, we need to help them to be physically active from the outset, because that will protect them from disease. I'm particularly thinking about heart disease over a very long time period. It doesn't present, heart disease does not present in children, but the beginning of heart disease is there. We've all got heart disease, by the way, as a cheery thought. It's just a lower level. It doesn't present and causes a problem. But to help children to grow up healthy and to get the habit of physically active lifestyles, that is really, really important. And with climate change and these really bigger pictures, we are going to have to change. You can forget, in a way, perversely, you can forget about the pandemic, because that has come and it will go. But climate change is here to stay, and we have to reduce carbon intensive travel. And the school journey is an obvious starting point to help our children on a route to a healthy life.
Brilliant, thank you. It was interesting, before we started the whole discussion, we were talking about how much we're all missing walking, being able to go out, being able to go for a walk. Carla and I were just talking about that, there's an online walking app, and it's just getting up and doing something physical. And interestingly, in lockdown, people were absolutely so excited to get out to do their hours exercise. And I think that's what we've got to harness, that hour's exercise. If we can now re-educate parents to use that hour's exercise for the walk to school and the walk home again, we've got them more people walking. Hendrik, I think it was, had a question, and it was about the fair weather walker. In the summer, everybody loves, going out, and they don't mind waiting outside the school. And I think, we're coming up for 2 o'clock, and I'm sure I've got to finish in a minute and thank the panelists. But there is that saying, isn't there? There's no such thing as bad weather, bad clothing. So sticking on your hoods and your galoshes and whatever, and going out for that walk at the moment is just so important, not just for our health and our heart, but also our mental health as well.
Yeah, just to chip in on that as well, I don't know if anyone saw, there was the International Puddle Jumping Championships were in the news last week, and I think that just says it all really. Children, they don't care what the weather's like. In fact, they love it if it's wet or it's snowy. So let's maybe capture a little bit of their enthusiasm.
Are you saying I should have stopped jumping in puddles? Because I still can't. And the other thing is kicking down sand castles and splashing through leaves. It's maybe I never grew up. Let's just have we got time, Ed, for just one finishing sort of sentence from each of the panelists, just to send us off with a real sort of power of positivity and what we can do. So could I just ask all three of you, brilliant, just to come up with, you know, if you had that magic wand, what would you do to get more children and parents walking and cycling to school more safely? Jenny?
Sorry, on mute. Yeah, I've probably just used my best line, haven't I? I've got ahead of the game there. But yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? You know, children, they love getting out in all weathers, and if they don't, then it's probably just because they've not had that experience yet. And so I think if we go out and we're celebrating our walks, whatever the weather, and we're spotting things and pointing them out. You know, I'm not a parent myself, but I do that to my husband. And so if you're doing that with your children on the walk to school, then you know, I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? Is getting that enjoyment from it, and then the other benefits will follow.
Perfect. Thank you. Carla?
Mine's similar. Share the joy and share your experience. The more we share and the more we start talking about what we're learning, what we're feeling about, obviously, school streets or active travel, physical activity, the more people think maybe I should try it a bit more often. So that hence it's peer-to-peer learning, to be fair. I think just sharing.
Perfect. Thank you. And Adrian?
So mine really is that school street closures appears to be a win-win-win for parents, schools, children, and the residents. So I think it is likely to be very cost effective, and we should embrace school street closures as part of the traffic management tools we have to help us enable children to travel more actively.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm just going to pick up on one comment somebody made, and it really resonated, and it was about maximising the benefits. So Rob Wiltshire, thank you for saying that. I think that's what we've got to do, maximise the benefits of school streets. On that note, can I just thank the panellists? Normally it would be, yeah, thank you, but I will clap. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting, and I think some good points. To everybody that was online and has put anything in the chat, we will try to get back to you and get some, if we didn't answer your questions, and if we didn't, you know where Carla is. She's at Westminster. You can you can send all your questions to Carla.
It's fine, honestly, I will answer. There is a Panborough group that we meet up and just talk, so I'd happily, if anyone wants to join that, just let me know.
Brilliant. And yeah, thank you all. Have a lovely evening, and hopefully see you in person next year. God, is it time to go for wine now?
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Ed.
Thank
you so much.